Hey guys, tonight we journey into the foul, fascinating, and oddly human world of medieval bathrooms. The places no fantasy movie ever lingers in for more than a second, even though they shaped daily life as much as castles, cathedrals, and battlefields ever did. Forget the polished stone corridors and heroic speeches for a moment, because the real Middle Ages were lived one urgent moment at a time, and sooner or later everyone, knight or peasant, monk or merchant, had to face the same problem with the same uncomfortable question. Where do you go and what do you use when there is no porcelain throne waiting for you? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. You're walking through a medieval city just before dawn, the kind of hour when the world feels suspended between sleep and work, when the cobblestones still hold the cool of the night, and the air is damp enough to carry every smell like a message. Your boots scrape against gritty mud that isn't really mud, not entirely, because in this place the streets are the final destination for so many things that modern life politely hides. You pass a shuttered stall where yesterday's fish guts still glisten faintly in the dimness. You pass a gutter that runs like a thin, sluggish vein along the street, carrying away whatever people have poured, tossed, or simply let fall. Somewhere nearby a dog barks, then stops, as if remembering it has no reason to waste energy. Your stomach tightens, not from hunger, but from something far more immediate and far less poetic. And you feel it, that familiar pressure that turns thoughts into priorities. In the distance, a bell tolls, slow and heavy, and for a moment you imagine it's not calling the faithful but warning you. You have minutes, not hours. Now if you were in your own home, in your own century, you just go. No strategy, no planning, no fear. But here, in a medieval city, answering nature's call is not a private moment of relief. It is a small logistical operation. It is a social risk. It is sometimes a physical danger. And it is always a reminder that civilization is built on systems most people never want to think about. Tonight we're going to pull back that veil. We're going to explore what medieval bathrooms really looked like, what people actually used instead of toilet paper, how waste was handled, who got stuck doing the dirtiest jobs, and what it felt like, smelled like, and sounded like to navigate a world where the most basic human need could become an adventure. And because this is history for sleep, we're going to do it slowly, carefully, with the kind of detail that lets your mind drift while the past unfolds like a candle-lit corridor. We'll move from peasant cottages to crowded city tenements, From monasteries with surprisingly organized latrines to castles with elegant garderobes that still couldn't save you from the realities below. A wheel. Meet the night soil men, the gong farmers, the people who made a living from what everyone else wanted to forget. And along the way, we'll discover a strange truth. Medieval sanitation was not just filth and chaos. It was also ingenuity, rules, routine, work, and in its own grim way, a kind of order. The first thing you need to understand is that the medieval world didn't have bathrooms in the modern sense. There wasn't a single private room in every home dedicated to hygiene and waste. Instead, there were solutions, and those solutions depended on where you lived, how much money you had, what kind of buildings surrounded you, and what kind of community tolerated you. Start with the simplest place, a small rural cottage. If you're a peasant family living on the edge of a village, your home is probably one room, maybe two if you're lucky, with a hearth that fills the air with smoke and the walls packed with mud, straw, and whatever else helps keep the wind out. The floor might be packed earth. The animals might share your space in winter, not because anyone loves the smell, but because warmth is survival. In a place like this, there's no indoor latrine. There's no plumbing. When you need to go, you go outside. Sometimes there's a designated spot, a place behind the house, near a hedge, away from the well if anyone has any sense at all. Sometimes there's a simple pit, dug into the ground, covered loosely and moved when it gets too full. And sometimes, especially at night, you don't want to risk stepping into darkness where you could twist an ankle, meet a thief, or just fall into the wrong hole. So you use a chamber pot, if your household has one, or a bucket, or whatever container is available. The chamber pot is one of the quiet heroes of medieval domestic life. Usually ceramic if you can afford it, sometimes metal if you're wealthy, sometimes wood if that's what you have. It's exactly what it sounds like. A pot meant for what the body needs to release when the door to the night is too cold or too dangerous. In richer homes it might be kept under the bed. In poorer homes it might be shared. And in the morning, someone has to empty it. If you've ever imagined medieval life as all sweeping romances and noble quests, hold on to this moment, because it's where reality always returns. Someone opens the door, steps into the chill, and carries last night's contents away from the living space. Where does it go? That depends. In the countryside, it might be dumped into a manure pile mixed with animal waste and eventually used to fertilize fields. Not because it's pleasant, but because nutrients are valuable. In some communities, waste is simply thrown into a ditch or a designated area away from the main paths. In others, there are rules, spoken or unspoken, about keeping it away from water sources. The well is life. The stream is life. Poison those and you don't just get sick. You kill your neighbors, and in a small village, Neighbors are the difference between surviving a bad harvest and starving through it. Now move from the countryside into the city, and everything changes, because density changes everything. A medieval city is a living organism, and like any organism, it produces waste. A lot of waste. People packed into narrow streets, living in tall timber buildings that lean toward each other like tired men sharing a secret. Workshops running day and night, animals, markets, cooking fires, and the constant movement of bodies. Here, the problem isn't just where to go, it's what happens after. Many city homes still rely on chamber pots, but now emptying them becomes an urban ritual and sometimes a weapon. You may have heard the famous warning "Gardez-l'eau" shouted from above, a cry that may come from "Gardez-l'eau," meaning watch out for the water, except it isn't water at all. The idea is simple. Someone, often from an upper floor, opens a window and dumps a pot into the street. If they're polite, they warn you. If they're not, you learn the hard way. And before you think this is just a crude stereotype, imagine the lack of options. There are no garbage trucks, no municipal sewage, treatment plants. If you live 3 floors up in a crowded building and you have to empty a chamber pot, you either carry it down the stairs and out into the street or courtyard, or you do what the easiest path allows. And the easiest path in a medieval city often wins. That said, cities weren't entirely lawless in this regard. Many medieval towns tried to regulate waste. There were ordinances about where you could dump, when you could dump, and what kinds of filth were forbidden from certain waterways. People understood, even without modern germ theory, that foul water and foul air were linked with sickness. They talked about miasma, bad air, corrupted vapors, and while their science was wrong, their observations weren't entirely foolish. Places that stank were places where disease seemed to bloom. Places with stagnant filth were places where fevers spread. They didn't know about bacteria, but they knew about consequences. Still, enforcement was uneven and money mattered. In wealthier districts, streets might be cleaner, not because the rich were morally superior, but because they could pay for labor, bribe officials, or simply live in areas where certain trades weren't allowed. In poorer districts, where tanners soaked hides in foul liquids, where butcher stalls drained blood into gutters, where overcrowding turned every alley into a shared closet of humanity, sanitation was a daily struggle. Now let's talk about the medieval public toilet, because yes, in many places there were communal latrines. Some cities built public privies near markets, near bridges, near gates, or near waterways where waste could be carried away. And sometimes they were exactly as grim as you imagine. Rows of holes over a pit, no privacy, the smell pressing into your clothes like smoke, but sometimes they were more organized than you'd expect. Some were built with stone, with channels of flowing water beneath. using rivers or streams to flush away waste in a constant current. It wasn't sterile, but it was a system. It was an attempt. And in a world with limited technology, an attempt matters. One of the most fascinating places to see medieval sanitation at its most structured is the monastery. Monks lived by rules, schedules, repetition, and those habits extended to bodily needs. Many monasteries had latrine blocks, sometimes called reredouters, built over running water, often connected to a stream diverted for the purpose. Imagine a long room, stone walls cool to the touch, wooden seats with holes, arranged in a line. Beneath them, a channel of water carrying away waste. Nearby, a place to wash hands, because monasteries cared about ritual cleanliness even if they didn't understand microbes. There's something almost surreal about it. The same institution that copied sacred texts by candlelight also engineered an early sewage system, because holy men still needed to go. And in that, you see how practical medieval life could be. Even the most spiritual communities had to deal with the physical. Now, let's climb upward into the world of castles and manor houses, because this is where medieval bathrooms become both more sophisticated and, in some ways, more terrifying. In a castle, you might find a garderobe. The word sounds elegant almost. Fashionable, and in a way it was, because garderobe could refer not only to a latrine, but sometimes to a closet where clothes were stored. And there's a reason for that. The ammonia from human waste, unpleasant as it is, can help deter moths. So yes, in some cases, a castle's toilet space was also used to protect valuable garments from insects. Medieval problems, medieval solutions. A garderobe latrine might be built into the thickness of a stone wall, a small chamber with a seat, the whole dropping down through a vertical shaft. In some castles, the waste fell into a cesspit, a contained pit that had to be emptied periodically. In others, especially those built over a moat or a steep slope, the waste simply dropped outside, down the wall, into water or onto the ground. If you're picturing a graceful tower with banners fluttering, just remember, somewhere beneath there's a streak of reality clinging to the stones. And this leads to one of the stranger medieval truths. Being rich didn't always mean being cleaner. A castle might have a private latrine, but if it emptied into a cesspit that wasn't managed well, the smell could seep upward. In winter, when windows were closed, the air could become heavy. In a siege, when you couldn't go outside safely, those pits filled faster. And when pits fill, the world becomes a different kind of battlefield. Also, garderobes could be dangerous. That vertical chute beneath the seat wasn't just a path for waste. It could be a path for rats. In rare cases, it could be a path for intruders. And it could certainly be a place where a careless person slipped, especially if the seat was slick or the chamber was poorly lit. Imagine, in the quiet hours, a torch guttering, the stone cold, and you're trying not to think about what's beneath you. It's not the most relaxing thought, but it's real. And tonight we're walking through what's real, slowly enough that your mind can glance at it and then drift on. Now we come to the question everyone asks, the question that makes medieval bathrooms feel truly alien to the modern mind. What did they use instead of toilet paper? The answer is, whatever worked, whatever was available, and whatever your social world considered acceptable. There was no universal standard. For the poorest people, it could be leaves, handfuls of grass, straw, moss, or even a smooth stick. In forested regions, moss was surprisingly useful, soft, absorbent, and plentiful. In farming areas, straw and hay were common, though not comfortable. Some people used rags, scraps of cloth that could be washed, reused, and washed again, though washed in the medieval world might mean rinsed in cold water, beaten on a stone and left to dry in air that wasn't exactly pure. The wealthier you were, the more likely you had access to linen scraps or softer cloth. In some places, wool was used. In others, you might find references to sponges, especially in contexts influenced by Roman practices, though communal sponges raise the kind of hygiene concerns that make a modern person's skin crawl. And there were other, stranger materials. Old paper, if you had it, which most people didn't. Dried plant fibers. Sometimes even bits of pottery, smooth shards in certain ancient contexts, though that's more associated with some classical practices than common medieval use. The key point is this: wiping was a practical act, not a standardized product. It depended on environment, class, and habit. And it wasn't always about wiping at all. In some places, water was used, especially where cultural practices emphasized washing, or where access to water made it feasible. But in a medieval European city, clean water was not guaranteed, and using dirty water for cleansing could trade one problem for another. So people did what they could. They adapted. Now, as you move through medieval society, you find that the act of relieving yourself wasn't always private. Privacy, as we understand it, was often a luxury. In crowded homes, you might use a chamber pot behind a curtain or simply turn your back. In communal latrines, you might sit beside strangers. In monasteries, even the act of using the latrine was part of the rhythm of communal life. The modern obsession with sealed doors and personal space would have seemed strange to many medieval people, not because they lacked shame entirely, but because the boundaries between public and private were drawn differently. And yet there were still taboos, there were still jokes, there was still disgust. Medieval people laughed at bodily functions, complained about smells, and insulted each other in terms that often involved filth. They weren't unaware, they were immersed. So what about the big question, the one that lingers over every medieval city like fog? Where did it all go? This is where we meet the workers of the night, the people whose labor kept medieval life from drowning in its own waste. In many cities, cesspits had to be emptied, privies had to be cleaned, and the people who did it were often called night soil men, or, in some English contexts, gong farmers. The name alone tells you what society thought of them. They worked at night because that's when fewer people would see them, when the smell could be less of a public scandal, and when the work could happen without disrupting daily commerce. Imagine them moving through narrow streets with carts, shovels, buckets, and a kind of grim expertise. They would descend into pits, scrape out what had accumulated, and haul it away. It was dangerous work. The gases in cesspits could be lethal. People could suffocate, they could fall, they could become sick. And yet, the work paid, sometimes surprisingly well, because nobody wanted to do it and because the city needed it. Waste wasn't always just waste. It could be fertilizer. It could be sold. It could be used in certain industrial processes. The medieval world recycled in ways we rarely acknowledge, not out of environmental virtue, but out of necessity. Nothing useful was wasted if someone could profit from it. And human waste, unpleasant as it was, contained value in a world where soil fertility mattered. Still, the social stigma remained. These workers were necessary and despised, essential and shunned. It's one of those medieval contradictions that feels strangely modern when you think about it. The people who keep systems running are often the least celebrated. Now let's return to you, walking through the city, because it's one thing to understand systems and another to feel what it would be like to navigate them as an ordinary person. You're not a monk with a reredoter. You're not a lord with a garderobe tucked into a tower wall. You're a traveler, a merchant maybe, or a laborer, or just someone far from home, and you need to find a place. What do? You follow smells. Unfortunately, you follow signs if they exist. Some places marked their privies. Some inns offered access to a latrine, but not always for free. In many establishments, using the facilities could be part of paying for food and drink, which created an odd medieval truth. One of the easiest ways to find a relatively safe toilet was to buy something. A cup of ale, a bowl of pottage, and permission to use the back house. If you couldn't pay, you might be turned away. And if you were desperate, you might seek an alley, a courtyard, a ditch, a river bank, which is exactly how cities ended up with their infamous filth. Need creates shortcuts. Now the real danger wasn't just embarrassment, it was disease. Medieval sanitation, especially in cities, created fertile ground for parasites and infections. Flies, fleas, worms, contaminated water, cuts that turned septic. People didn't know the mechanisms, but they knew patterns. They feared corrupted air. They burned herbs to sweeten rooms. They carried pomanders, little balls of fragrant substances to mask stench, and they hoped protect themselves. They cleaned with vinegar. They believed strong smells could fight bad smells. Sometimes those practices did help a little, by discouraging insects or by providing some mild antiseptic effect. But often they were just comfort rituals, ways of feeling less powerless in a world where sickness could arrive like a thief. And in that sense, the medieval bathroom was not just a place, it was a symbol. It represented how thin the line was between human order and natural chaos. You can build walls. You can build markets. You can build churches that reach toward the sky. But if you can't manage waste, your city becomes a trap. Now let's pause just for a moment and appreciate something quietly remarkable. Medieval people never stopped trying. Despite limitations, they built latrines, dug pits, passed laws, hired workers, created routines. They didn't succeed by modern standards, but they weren't simply wallowing in ignorance. They were constantly negotiating with reality. That negotiation looked different depending on place and time. Some cities invested more, some less. Some had better water flow. Some sat on marshy ground that made cesspits overflow. Some had rivers that could carry waste away at the cost of poisoning downstream neighbors. And those neighbors in turn complained, fought, and passed their own rules. The medieval world was full of disputes about filth, because filth is never just filth. It's politics, it's class, it's labor. It's who gets to dump and who has to clean. Now, if you want to understand medieval bathrooms at their most vivid, imagine a bustling market day. People pour into the city from surrounding villages. Stalls fill the square. Meat roasts on spits. Fish is laid out on wet boards. Bread is stacked in baskets. Children weave through crowds. Dogs sniff at scraps. And all day long, bodies do what bodies do. Somewhere behind the stalls, there might be a public privy, maybe a line, maybe a cluster of people trying not to look at each other too directly. Maybe a boy is sent to empty a bucket. Maybe a woman mutters a curse about the smell. Maybe an official walks by, pretending not to notice because there are more urgent problems today. And by afternoon, the gutters run a little darker. By evening, the smell thickens. And then after the market closes, after the last drunk stumbles home, the night soil men come, moving like shadows with their carts, scraping out the pits that kept the city from collapsing into its own waste. It's not glamorous, but it's the invisible heartbeat of urban life. Now, what about bathing? People often assume medieval people never bathed. That isn't entirely true. Bathing existed. Public bathhouses existed in some places, especially earlier in the medieval period. And in certain regions, people washed hands and faces. They combed hair. They used perfumes and herbs. But bathing as a frequent, private, daily ritual like many people imagine today was not common, especially among the poor, and especially in cold climates where heating water was labor-intensive, and where shared spaces meant modesty concerns. Also, beliefs shifted over time. In some periods, people feared that hot baths opened pores and made disease more likely. In others, bathhouses became associated with immorality. And as plague and repeated epidemics reshaped society, many communities became more suspicious of communal spaces. Hygiene, like everything else, was a cultural negotiation, not a simple yes or no. And the bathroom sits at the center of that negotiation, because even if you wash, you still have to go. So medieval people developed rituals of clean enough. They changed undergarments when they could. They used linen shifts. They used urine in cleaning processes because urine contains ammonia, useful for laundering and fulling cloth. Yes, another uncomfortable truth. Urine was a household resource. People collected it. Some cities even had collection points. In a world without chemical detergents, bodily substances were part of the toolkit. The medieval bathroom wasn't just where waste ended. It was also where materials began. Now let's step into a medieval inn for a moment, because travelers faced unique challenges. You arrive late, soaked from rain, tired from walking or riding, and the innkeeper offers you a space in a crowded room. Privacy is scarce. The bed might be shared. The air smells like wet wool and old smoke. You eat, you drink, and then, inevitably, you need to find the privy. The inn might have an outhouse, a separate structure behind. The building, perhaps a wooden seat over a pit, or it might have a shared latrine area for guests. You take a candle if one is available, or a lantern. You step outside into the yard. The ground is uneven. Somewhere a pig snorts in the dark. You find the door, you pull it open, and the smell hits. You thick and immediate, a warm, sour cloud rising from the pit below. You sit, trying not to think about insects, trying not to imagine the pit collapsing, trying not to drop your candle. You do what you came to do. And then comes the other question. What do you wipe with? If you're traveling, you might carry a cloth. Many people did, a rag that could be washed later. If you don't have one, you look for straw, for scraps, for anything. You make do. Then you leave, you close the door, and you walk back to the inn, feeling both relieved and slightly haunted by how close you just were to the underside of medieval life. Back inside, you lie down, and maybe you hear someone else get up to go. The floor creaking, the murmur of discomfort, the soft curse of someone who waited too long. The bathroom is never far. It is always present, even when unspoken. Now let's return to the castle for one more moment, because castles show the medieval mind's ability to combine comfort with danger. Imagine you're a minor noble or a guest. You're led through corridors lit by torches. The stone is cold. The air carries the faint scent of smoke, wax, and something else, something less pleasant hidden. Under perfume, you're shown to a small chamber with a garderobe. It might have a wooden seat, maybe even a bit of carved detail, because status likes to decorate even the most basic functions. You sit and you realize you are perched over a void inside the wall. Somewhere far below, your waist will fall. You can hear it faintly if the castle is quiet enough, a distant splash or thud, and suddenly the grandeur feels thin, like a tapestry hiding a rough wall. And if you lean slightly, you can sometimes feel the draft rising up, carrying cold air and the faintest trace of what lies beneath. Medieval comfort was not sealed. It breathed. It leaked. It reminded you. And now let's talk about one last piece of the gross truth, the part people often forget. Medieval bathrooms were not only about waste, they were also about vulnerability. To use a public privy is to lower your guard. To go outside at night is to expose yourself. In cities, latrines could be places where thieves waited because people were distracted, because pockets were loosened, because dignity was already compromised. In times of unrest, privies could be places where enemies were attacked. In some grim stories, people were killed and hidden in cesspits because it was a place nobody wanted to search. Even in everyday life, the privy was a place where you were alone or alone enough, and that could be unsettling. Medieval life was full of threats, and the simplest needs could put you in the wrong place at the wrong time. So what did people do? They adapted again. They went in pairs. They went quickly. They used chamber pots. They planned their day around safe places. They learned which taverns had decent backhouses, which monasteries offered charity to travelers, which public privies were least likely to collapse. They built a mental map of relief, a private geography woven into public life. And that, quietly, is one of the most human things in history. Because no matter the century, people build routines around their bodies. The medieval world just did it with fewer layers between need and environment. Now, as we slowly bring our journey to a softer place, let's step back and look at what we've seen. We've walked through village life where a pit behind the house and a chamber pot under the bed were normal. We've moved into crowded cities where waste flowed through gutters, where laws tried to keep filth from swallowing streets, where chamber pots could become airborne hazards, and where the night soil men worked in darkness to keep the system from collapsing. We've visited monasteries, where discipline and engineering created some of the closest things to medieval flushing systems. We've climbed into castles where garderobes offered privacy, but also reminded you that even stone walls can't erase the realities below. And we've answered the strange, practical question of what people used instead of toilet paper. Moss, straw, leaves, rags, cloth, water when possible. Whatever a place and a person could manage. None of it was perfect. All of it was human. And maybe the gross truth is not only that medieval bathrooms were dirty, but that they were part of a living world where nothing was separated, where waste, labor, class, and survival were tangled together like roots under a street. In the modern world, the bathroom is a private, sealed room where you can forget what happens after you flush. In the medieval world, you couldn't forget. The city reminded you. The smell reminded you. The workers reminded you. The rules reminded you. And in that constant reminder, there is a kind of honesty. A harsh honesty, yes, but honesty all the same. So now, as you settle deeper into your bed, as the room around you becomes quieter, let your mind drift away from the gutters and pits and stone garderobes. Imagine instead the soft hush of night over a medieval town, the last candle going out in a window, the streets emptying, the distant sound of water moving beneath a bridge. Somewhere, far below the stories people tell about kings and wars, life continues in its simplest form. Someone closes a door, someone carries a bucket, someone scrapes out a pit. And because they do, the city wakes again tomorrow. If you enjoyed this slow walk through the less glamorous side of history, make sure you're subscribed for more. And as you close your eyes tonight, remember that the past wasn't only shaped by grand moments. It was shaped by ordinary needs and the quiet systems that met them. Rest easy, breathe slowly, and let the details fade like footsteps on cobblestone disappearing into the dark.